What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the PT Coffee Cast, brought to you by The Movement. My name is Dalton, and alongside me today is my beautifully bearded friend, William. William, how are we doing today?
Doing good, man. It was a good weekend. It's been a good week of having you have a bigger beard than me, but
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think we're past that point.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's over. It was
Hope
nice.
you enjoyed it.
It was nice while it lasted. I felt a little bit more, I got a little bit more wisdom than you for a period of time, and now we're back to me not knowing anything and you having all the wisdom and knowledge. So here we are.
There we go. I guess that's who I am, you know?
Exactly. Guys, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode. We're excited to have you back. If you aren't subscribed to the podcast, make sure you do that on your podcast platform so you don't miss out on any of our episodes. We have put out a new website, all things mentorship and podcast. We really encourage you guys to go check that out, themovementmentorship.com. It'll have everything there with regards to what the mentorship consists of, our podcast, all that fun stuff. We're super stoked about that. On that website, you can also set up a call to dive into and apply for our next cohort of the Movement Mentorship, which we're really looking forward to getting off the ground. We need a couple more people to join that cohort so we can launch it and have an exciting group. So if you are interested in that, make sure you check that out on the website. And then YouTube, if you want to see William's beard now longer than my beard, you can check out our YouTube channel where we put all the video episodes of this podcast out. But let's get into the good stuff. Today we're continuing on with our clinical question series where we have a slow drip of questions that we like to ask our clients, and then we kind of break down and dive into like what we want to get out of those. I think our last question was, I don't remember, so I'm not going to say it.
What do you think about this
There you go.
exercise? What do you think about this exercise?
That wisdom and that knowledge. That was our first question, so make sure you check out that episode. We break that down. But today we are diving into a question about barriers. So one question that we like to ask is, what barriers do you foresee arising with regards to this plan? So this is a question we like to ask our clients. Me and Will were chatting a little bit before we recorded. It's not something that we ask our clients every single time we're working with them, but it is one that I've asked in the past, and I do like to dive into it and get a lot out of the question, and it can be really good for setting expectations and diving into maybe some challenges the client might face. It's something that we usually like to ask after we've kind of taken them through, what it's going to look like to work with us, identifying their problems, communicating to them, how we are going to help them, solve this problem. We're going to guide them through that process. And then when we're kind of talking a little bit about what it likes to work, talk a little bit about what it's like to work with us as you move forward, is sometimes where this barrier question will come up.
Yeah, it's something that, like Dalton said, we're not necessarily saying all the time, but there's certain indicators where it might be helpful to ask this question. And I think what we really want to do with this question is, like, we always talk about like meeting the client where they're at, because we're obviously huge fans of like pushing people and taking them closer to their goals and maybe helping them get to a place where they didn't even know they could get to. But to do that, you have to be where they are, and something we were talking about before was, it's great to set expectations, but if you're setting expectations for something that ultimately is going to overwhelm your client and it's too far ahead of where they are, then they're not going to have much success. So that there's some indicators of when we would use this question.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what we've learned over the years is the more that you can like have these barriers be identified and talked about earlier on, the more likely these people are to like continue and have success with the plan of care. A lot of times people have pursued this type of change before in their life, whether it be like, working with another physio or, we work with a lot of people that are looking to like change their health. So, and and a lot of people in life have worked on trying to make changes for themselves and have struggled. So they often know a lot of the barriers that they have run into the past. And so instead of like allowing for those barriers to repeat themselves, which is what often happens with all of us when we try to go through some type of behavior change, is you look back and a lot of the same barriers and mistakes are what keeps us from reaching our goals. So being able to have this conversation and then set out a plan to help overcome those barriers can be, very reassuring, I think, to the client, and maybe leave them feeling confident that like, hey, these have been things that I've struggled with in the past, but now I have a plan to address them when they show up, where maybe they didn't have that in the past.
And I think people want to feel like where they're at, but they might not always explicitly say things that are barriers for them. I think probably just because people don't want to be viewed as like not like having to be held back,
Mm.
So I feel like asking this question is good sometimes to pull that stuff out and like show them that you recognize it's important to work with where they're at.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times too, people don't maybe really connect the dots to like what are the barriers that they're struggling with. And when you go through the initial assessment, the way that we encourage people to go through the initial assessment, through this podcast and on the mentorship, and it really pulls out a lot of information. And I'm trying to be aware of like connecting those dots and like where there's reoccurring things that pop up where I'm like, oh, this could be a barrier that someone has. A lot of times like something like time is like one that people have a lot of struggle with, and you can kind of pick up on that being something that someone's struggling with by the responses that they're giving you to what they do in their life, and what their exercise looks like, and maybe why they haven't finished that marathon training plan. Like there's a lot of things that can indicate that, which then can allow for you to connect the dots. And what I like about this question is sometimes I'll ask this question to people and like, what barriers do you expect to pop up, with us working together on this plan? And sometimes people will be like, no, I don't think I have any barriers that are going to pop up. And I'm always, in my mind, I'm seeing that there might be something, right? And so that's another good, it's a response that's interesting, because now you're identifying that this person maybe just isn't aware of what's actually preventing them from getting to where they want. And I'll in that moment sometimes be like, well, would you be curious to hear some of the things that I've picked up that might have been barriers that's impacted you from getting to where you want to go in the past based off our conversation today? And then I will like tell them some of those things that we've, picked up on. And then oftentimes people are like, oh yeah, like that makes sense to me, right? Or I can see that, blah, blah, blah. And then you can ask them, well, what would be some good ways that you think we could address this barrier so that it doesn't become something that keeps you from moving forward and reaching your goals?
And so you're asking the question if people are saying things like, oh, work's been really busy lately, or we just had a kid, or, whatever it is, like you're kind of listening as you're talking to them for things that might indicate that there could be barriers to like their goal.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm asking that from my perspective, I'm asking this question because I know there's barriers, but I want them to say what the barriers are so that they can identify them out loud, and then we can talk about those right away, is usually what I like to do.
Yeah, totally. Because I think like sometimes it's not like I think people like for me, for example, like I'm someone who like values working out, right? For example, and so I would go into a situation and feel like, wouldn't be a barrier to get me to do more exercise, right? However, there's things outside of my control that for sure are going to limit like when I can do things, so it would be helpful in that circumstance to have that brought to my awareness where I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? Like there's certain limitations or certain like amounts of flexibility I'm going to have with the program,
Mm-hmm.
and it's good to just like get on the level, get on the same wavelength, and make sure that, as the client, I know that you're okay if like I need to have a slight adjustment in the program, that
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah, of course. Like bringing up those barriers and knowing that that's something we can keep going on the time thing is that you can now identify that. And I like to ask them what they think we can do to make sure that we don't have that impact them getting to their goals so that they can bring out some ideas. Sometimes they don't have ideas. That's when you can start to be like, hey, do you mind if I share some things that I've had success with people in the past? And then you can give them those ideas. But now you can set those expectations out. And obviously you're not going to be like, hey, Susie, like, if time's an issue, like, we need to make sure, like, we're going to put these 6 days on the calendar. Like, you can't miss these days. Like, that's probably not how I'm going to go about approaching that, right? Knowing that that's probably going to overwhelm the client. And then they're just going to be like, well, screw this. Like, I don't have the time. And then we're sitting in the same spot. So you kind of have to understand the client a little bit as well and what might be successful for them. But it allows for you to set better expectations that are more likely to have people start to respond well and get the ball rolling. So then maybe you can build on that to where then they're committing to the time. This is the time that I'm going to do this, because now they've worked on that barrier and overcome it, and they can progress it. It's kind of like progressive overload. You're not going to go and throw 225 on the bar if you haven't lifted the bar in like, a month or 2 months, right? It's the same thing with like behavior change or overcoming barriers. It's like you're not going to just bombard them with the hardest possible thing. You're going to like ease your way into it, right? And I think that's what that question can do. And it can have you and the client start to work on that together early on versus like waiting for the barrier to come up, happen, and then that person's like, well, shit, here I am again. I suck. I didn't overcome this barrier again. And then they get frustrated and fall off.
There's so many different examples of barriers. Like, you can really we could make a huge list, but I do think it's a good thing to kind of brainstorm in your own head. Think of like all the things that have come up in circumstances before, and just kind of list them out and think about different strategies that, or what went wrong, how could you have potentially avoided that, and just thinking through that type of thing, so that you can arm yourself with thoughts for those different scenarios, like the time thing, or maybe someone who has had not had success with physio in the past, or someone who stops as soon as their pain goes away, or whatever the circumstance is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I think oftentimes the reason people don't finish their plan of care, fall off, is a lot of times it's because that they're not able to overcome the barriers that's happened so much in the past, and they just kind of like give up. And I think a big part of what we do as a healthcare provider, coach, physiotherapist is be able to help the people through that. And like you said, a lot of times people know. It's like you look at yourself, like you were just using your example. It's like, I know and I know you value health, but there's a lot of shit that's going on in your life at this time, which makes it way harder, But then even looking at your situation, like you were able to identify that. And I think what's good is you're able to do this on your own, but then you started putting things in place that have allowed for you to overcome that barrier. Like you've printed out your workout schedule, and you've left it in the gym so that you see that, which prompts you to do it. You've tried to fit in the exercise when you have this time right now and get what you can. Like I remember yesterday, you finished like a bench press exercise that you didn't get to do the day before because of a time situation, and you finished it that next day. Now, is that the best way to like build optimal strength? Probably not, but is it the way to start overcoming that barrier and stack some wins and start to get the consistency and be able to move forward? 100% it is. And oftentimes that right there is what clients struggle with, and they're not able to overcome because they don't know how to do it on their own. And it's on us to help them through those things and reassure them like, hey, it's cool if you run out of time and you need to finish that workout the next day. And even if you're just doing 5 sets of bench press because you need to get that done because you've committed to doing that, that's cool. Like, do that. And that's really positive, I think.
Yeah, and that same strategy might not work for somebody else, depending on what their specific barriers might be or might have been in the past, So I think that's where like it's exploring those things a lot of the times that actually leads to success, independent of, what the specific program is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, program, injury, whatever it is, and like I think that's why we emphasize so much the importance of this aspect of the initial assessment. Like, we've talked about this on the podcast in our webinar that we did in the mentorship, is like, give yourself a solid amount of time at the end of the session, like at least 10 to 15 minutes to like lay out the plan and have opportunity to have these conversations, versus like, all right, I'm going to get a couple more, objective tests in that are going to maybe give me a little bit of information, but not really going to do much for me. And I miss out on the opportunity to talk about all the things that we just talked about with this clinical question that is going to help the success of your client way more long-term than those two objective tests that you could just do the next session.
Yeah, 100%.
Sweet. Cool. Well, I think that was good. Let's wrap it up there. So that was question number 2 of our clinical question series. I don't know how many of these we're going to do. I think we got a couple more ideas brewing in our brain, so you might see a couple more questions come up. But if you guys have any questions that you really like to ask, send us a DM on Instagram, or you can send us an email with some of your favorite ones. Maybe we'll chat a little bit about those on the podcast. So if you aren't following us on Instagram, head over there, follow us at PT Coffee Cast. If you haven't checked out our website, head over there. The movementmentorship.com has all things mentorship, all things podcast. Our email's there if you want to reach out via email. We are looking for a few more people to jump into the cohort, so you can schedule a call with me by clicking the link on the website. We chat a little bit more about the mentorship, see if you're a good fit, and get you into that cohort if that seems like what you need to do. And then make sure you guys are following us on YouTube, where you can see our beautiful faces having these conversations and drinking coffee. But that is all we got for today, guys. As always, stay caffeinated. Peace.